Ladies and gentlemen, this interview is brought to you by Burn It Up Coaching and Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self in our 21-day challenge. So if you're an entrepreneur or a high achiever and you feel like something's missing, you're vaguely dissatisfied, you feel like you've plateaued, you feel like you're not truly performing at your greatest possible self, your maximum potential, 21-day challenge might be the ignition and redirection to help you achieve your goals, your top priorities. What we'll do is we'll get clear on your statement of purpose, why you're here, your vision of your life moving forward, and then we'll break that back down into bite-sized steps. So over the next 21 days, you're crystal clear on your top priorities, the things that are going to move the ball forward the most for you, the things that are going to inspire you, that are going to bring your passion back to life, that are going to ignite your performance and results. And I'll hold you accountable every single day. You'll have daily progress reports. You'll have weekly deep dive calls where we get to dive into the stuff that comes up, the limiting beliefs, the self-sabotage, to make sure that you are maximally performing and achieve that 21-day goal, 21-day challenge goal. If that's something you're interested and committed in, send me a message, chris@beyourgps.com, or find me on Facebook and send me a message there, facebook.com/th3burns, and let me know that you're committed to starting your 21-day challenge, and we'll see if it's a great fit for you and go from there. So thanks in advance for doing that. I look forward to working with you. Next is the iTunes review of the week, and that is by You Got Sam. Sam said, "Leap into launching your vision. I absolutely immersed myself with this podcast all weekend. I can speak from personal experience. I used to be the #1 procrastinator on the face of this planet. However, after meeting Chris Burns and listening to his podcast and all his content all over social media, I've taken the leap and launched my vision, and it has become a reality in the making. Hands down, so much value and knowledge has been taken away from this podcast. I highly recommend subscribing and taking that leap, just like I have chosen to do. Cheers." Thanks so much, Sam. And if you want to give us a review, go to beyourgps.com/iTunes or search Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self in the podcast store, podcast app, or iTunes store, and give us a review there. We appreciate you. Thanks for doing that. Or you can find us on Facebook and do it there. Facebook.com/beyourgps, or search Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self on Facebook. Thank you so much in advance for doing that. We look forward to hearing your feedback. Now, for the man of the hour. This guy, John, is an incredible leader. He's someone who absolutely is embodying leadership, and you definitely want to stay tuned till the end of this interview because he's going to be giving us gold nuggets from tons of experience working with companies around the world, internationally, and we are absolutely blessed and privileged to have him on here. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's doing amazing things, so definitely stay tuned because you never know what one idea can change the rest of your life. So stick around. John Murphy is a top 10 executive coach on LinkedIn. John Murphy is a results-oriented business coach and mentor to senior executives and CEOs around the world. He's a great communicator with broad experience and is skilled at discussing issues that make businesses and individuals grow and thrive. John is a #1 best-selling author on Amazon, and his book, 10 Key Traits of Top Business Leaders, is a must-read for any executive with leadership aspirations. Living and working in the south of France, John is originally from Ireland. So we're going to hear how he's created this global business, been able to impact tons of people, and hear even more about his journey. John, are you ready to rock this?
I am absolutely ready and raring to go.
Awesome. You are now live on Becoming Your Greatest Possible Self. Thanks so much for being here with us today. We appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule to share with our audience how we can become our greatest possible selves with you. Thank you.
Chris, a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, John. So let's dive right into the theme of the day, which today is embodying your leadership. So John, how has this concept and this principle of embodying your leadership played a role in your life, in your career, and what does it mean to you?
Well, I think it's really interesting because when you start off your career, you very often hear people talking about kind of leading and managing and coaching, and people use the words interchangeably. Mm-hmm. And I think it's only as you go forward that you realize that they're actually quite fundamentally different elements. And I think leadership is something that you've got to aspire to. But I think one of the important things about leadership is that you can't give yourself the title of leader, much at all as you might like to do it, right? because you can only be a leader if you've got followers. And in order to have followers, you've got to be something, and you've got to be somebody that's, that's worth following.
Yeah.
And that puts a lot of pressure on people to understand that, and also to be it. And I think that when you're talking about a leadership in an organization, it's, the role of leaders, and it's not just coming with the title of CEO, it comes at all levels in organizations. But I think it's people who really embody kind of the vision, the mission, the values of the organization, and they become the kind of the walking epitome of all of those. And they're also the guardian of the values that are in the organization. And it's so important for people to embrace that. But then, it spills over into lots of things about, being consistent, and people will trust you if you're consistent. And I think that that's one of the big challenges in the business world today, is about that sort of consistency, and that people see that you're living to a sense of values in all of the things that you do. Because, to an extent, it can be easier to live to those values when things are going extremely well.
Oh, yeah.
But when things get a bit tough, and some tough decisions have to be made, then you really do get tested. And very often it's in those circumstances that people really assess whether you are, making hard decisions, making tough decisions, but you're doing it in a way that is, consistent with the values that you state. Yeah. So I think that it's something that you've got to live up to on a daily basis. I think it's something that you've got to remind yourself about on a daily basis. Yeah. And it's always something to reflect upon, is that, for the people that you're leading, is to challenge yourself, is that what are they benefiting? How are they benefiting by being led by me? And, that's a big question to ask. Yeah. And, unless you're able to answer that in some way without it being a conceited answer, but that there's real value that you're delivering as a leader, then I think you're beginning to slip. And I think it is that challenge, but it's something that you've got to keep on renewing.
It's so powerful. And I love everything you share is so powerful. I love the guardian of the values of the organization, especially when it's difficult. I think we live in a very fair weather world, right? When things are going well, a lot of people, it's easy to be that person who is a champion for those values. When you're making $1 million a month, okay, yeah, totally, it's easy to do that. But when you're first starting out your journey, when you're scrapping just to get your first clients or customers, or get noticed, to build a brand, to build a reputation, it can be a challenge. And a lot of people, since they think nobody's watching or nobody's paying attention, they take that for granted, and really that doesn't happen. Like it doesn't. That's not true. The impact of those actions when you think nobody is watching are far reaching than people can anticipate. So I want to ask John, how do we really hold to our values through those difficult times? What would you recommend about really standing firm in those values and being rooted in those? How would you recommend leaders do that?
Yeah, I think that one of the, we talk about values, and certainly I know when I work with the organizations, you talk about values and you put words to that, and there are all sorts of, very laudable words like, trust and honesty and integrity. And, we all understand what those words mean, but you've got to make sure that there's a nuance to those words for your specific organization. So when you're talking about something like trust, what do we actually mean by trust in the organization on a day-to-day basis? What do we define as trust? What do we define as integrity? Because we understood kind of what the words mean from a global perspective. But really, you only get down to really living values is when you're able to actually explain it in the context of your organization, because people have got to understand what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And I said, when it gets tough, and there are things like organizations, large organizations, like all businesses, they go through different phases. And one of the things that when you come into a restructuring time where it becomes challenging, where maybe there's layoffs, there's redundancies, and the important thing is that even though that's a hard decision and a tough decision and not a nice decision, and nobody likes doing it, but that people who have left and the people who are staying can see that it was done Okay, it was done for commercial reasons, and that's just the commercial reality. But it was done in a way that was consistent with the values. So it's really understanding how how those values play out in terms of behavior with each other within the organization, so people understand what's in and what's out. And I know that the organizations where I've done work, where they have invested the time in really not just kind of putting together the values and putting it up in a plaque in reception, which I'm always a bit cynical about when I actually see that. But anyway, maybe that's unfair, but I am a little bit cynical about it, because my experience is that if you're doing it, that's kind of for show, but it's not for substance. And what you really need to know is that people understand, everybody in the organizations. If we talk about trust, if we talk about integrity, if we talk about holding each other accountable, everybody knows exactly what it means for this organization, and everything that happens is consistent with that. And it's not a one and done thing. We've got to come back to the values all of the time, and keep on asking yourself, the way we're doing things, the way we're making decisions, the way we're rolling out our strategy, the way we're dealing with our customers, the way that we're dealing with staff, the way that we're dealing with our shareholders, is that all consistent with the values that we're stating? And really to have them as almost like a checklist, so that we're really looking and making sure that everything we do flows through. Because when you look at teams, particularly when you look at teams, and I spent a lot of my life working with teams, well, when you're looking at teams, at the base of every team is trust, right? Yeah. And there's a direct correlation between trust and the output and performance in terms of profitability, revenue, growth, whatever it might be. There's a direct correlation between trust and that. So it's not a nice to have, but when you violate trust, not only are you impacting the bottom line, but that actually stays broken for quite a long period of time, and it takes a long time to rebuild it. So it is about getting that trust in the organization, that everyone knows where they stand, everybody knows that they can articulate views, everybody knows they can be critical if that's what they need to be, because sometimes we need to be critical. Yes. But it's not going to be, oh, well, wait till I get my chance to get even with that particular score. And it's that sort of living values that just makes a huge difference in a team.
So powerful, John. You're full of wisdom. We could tell you've been doing this for a year or two, right?
more than a year or two, believe you me.
Awesome. So for people who are just finding out about you, John, I want you to tell a little bit more about John Murphy International and your company and what you guys do there.
Yeah, well, I mean, the organization was founded 14 years ago. I founded it 14 years ago. Prior to that, I had been in the corporate world. So I had, being honest, I had done very much the traditional corporate route. I started as an insurance salesman, door to door. Wow. And that's a great lesson.
Oh man.
That really is a great lesson. And it's a great way of learning your trade, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And there are things that I learned doing that stood me when ultimately I became a CEO. Wow. And I think that you really got to hang on to that. But I did the kind of this working through, became a sales manager, a sales director, sales and marketing director, general manager, and then CEO. So I kind of did all of that. And then I realized that the part of the business that I loved most of all was, hiring, recruiting a team and getting the team to work effectively together, and to get cross-functional teams to work together. Because I was always fascinated by, in many cases, what I'd experienced was that, you went into particularly in large multinational, you go into a planning process, and it's you do this every year, and it's tough and it's arduous, and then you do the plan, and then you look at it occasionally, and then you look at it toward the end of the year, and you kind of think, God, there were some things there we actually said we were going to do. We never even got near them, right? And I think statistically it's true that only about 60% of plans actually get implemented. I think that's a Harvard figure that I've come across. And I think that's still, even it's been around for some time, don't think there's a great improvement on that. And I was always fascinated by how is it that, fundamentally you get, high quality, intelligent, competent people, and you put them together and you might be hitting a sales target or a revenue target, but when you look at your plans, you're only kind of delivering 60 odd percent of that. And how does that happen? Right?
Wow.
I was always fascinated by that. And I realized, probably a bit of a slow learner, but I realized that, it was about leveraging the group.
Yeah.
It's not this, it's not the sum of the individual parts. It's actually about getting all those parts working together, that they're leveraging each other, that the experience and the expertise of one rubs off on the other, that you're really getting them to work cohesively as a team. And I think that, if you can get that team dynamic working, then, it's just gold, right? And it's very interesting, and I hate bringing this up since you're on the far side of the water, but very recently in the Ryder Cup in golf, and you saw where the European team and against the American team, and on paper the American team was hands down higher ranking, more winners, but the European team was not as highly ranked, but they actually functioned as a team better than the US team. And, individually, say the US team was far better, but the collective didn't work as well. So you just find that it's about getting that blend right. And when I left corporate life, I said that was the bit that I was fascinated by, and I loved coaching. So I started off working with teams and working with individual executives. And I do that. So I coach senior executives around the world. I work with senior management teams and some very large organizations, some global organizations, also some smaller organizations. And I also do a lot of work in terms of getting, new managers really launched effectively in the world. So that's the work that we do. So we're very much specialists in that space.
Wow, so beautiful. I love it. And what came to my mind is Napoleon Hill's Mastermind effect, right? When two or more people are gathered in my name, it's also in the Bible, right? A greater results can be achieved, right? And when a team has these different people with their different strengths, and we learn how to harness those strengths towards a collective goal, not everyone trying to be the person in the spotlight, not trying to feed our ego. Rather, it's like, how do we achieve the goal as a team and have everyone performing at their best in their best spot and position and role? Then that's when we truly get the best results. So that work and that skill is much needed in the world today, John. So thank you for facilitating that, because there's so many teams being put together because it's a good thing. Businesses are growing. Businesses are expanding. And when businesses expand, they have to bring in new people to facilitate that expansion, to facilitate those new income targets, to facilitate the new production quotas, to facilitate the new systems that must be implemented. And the teams may not always right off the bat get along great. So thank you for doing that. And I want to,
and I think the other part of that, Chris, is that, and just to tell you a very quick story,
Sure.
which I think is very symptomatic of a lot of organizations. I worked with, by definition, I work with successful teams. I'm not working with teams that are unsuccessful. I'm working with teams that are highly successful, but it's about raising the bar. But I worked with a very successful team, and we were trying to really kind of raise the bar in terms of optimizing the potential of that team. But it was really interesting. Part of the conversation, at one stage I asked, which on the face of it was a pretty simple question, guys, okay, you're facing into the year, it's a challenging year, but it's a dynamic year, and they work in a dynamic industry. I said, what are the top three priorities for this team? Right now, you say that's not a complicated question, right? And there's 8 of them in the room, I think it was 8 of the room. Chris, that conversation took 4 hours.
wow.
Right? Now, why is that? It's not because they're instant, and everyone would have thought we're really clear on our priorities, but they were really clear on the priorities from their perspective. Right? And what you need to make sure is that, so the finance people were really clear on their priorities, the marketing people, the IT people, the ops people, all of that. They were clear. Now, there was obviously there was crossover, but when you actually asked everybody, we're saying, okay, well, hang on a second. What are the priorities for the team? And if you don't have full alignment at that senior top team level, you're never going to have the alignment down the organization. So that's why that was 4 hours was well spent in terms of saying, okay, guys, I know what you're talking about is from your perspective, but let's look at it from the overall business perspective. And that 4-hour conversation was so valuable in terms of saying, well, okay, well, now let's cascade it down. And do they cascade down, and do they cascade back up again? So that we actually made sure that there was complete alignment in the organization. And that's part of working with the team. But also the other part is actually getting the team to sign up to a way of behaving with each other. So what are the rules of this game? What are the rules for this team of how we are going to behave together? And they may change over a period of time, depending on the objectives and the evolution and the development of the team. But you really do have to kind of agree those, because my contention is always that if you get that part right, you'll get the delivery of the plan right. Yeah. Because the plan is nothing more than just a grandiose to-do list, right? Right. But the behavior is what gets in the way of the plan being executed. So really to focus in on that, and that's where it's getting alignment. I know, sorry, I cut across you, and that's a long-winded answer to your question. But I just thought it was actually a valuable kind of story to that.
Super. And I also wanted to mention about the trust. This totally goes into how you said trust is the foundation of every team. Without trust, then they can't perform. If there's not trust of what's the standard of behavior, the standard of how I will treat you, the standard of what is expected, right? Expectations, I think, are such a foundational part of relationships. If people don't know what to expect between each other, how they communicate, how can I expect that you will communicate with me? If someone says, oh, I'm always going to do email, and someone says, I always want to be called, that doesn't work. That creates a lack of rapport. That creates a lack of trust. So I think that having those agreements and those what is expected up front and the boundaries and all that is super important to have that trust so the team can perform at their optimal. And it takes that initial time of saying, hey, what are our top priorities? What can we expect from each of us? What can we count on from each of us so that we can achieve that goal? That's super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. So let's dive into more about this being a important role in a team. How do we show up as that powerful team member, regardless of where we go, what we're doing, or what kind of leadership position that we might be in? Let's go into the foundations of that you've seen so far in your career, John.
Well, I think that the foundations, when you look at the whole role of leaders and what you've got to embrace, I mean, it's very much, as I said, it's part of it is a kind of a state of mind and a mindset. But I think that you've got to be really clear. You've got to be a visionary. Now, I don't mean that you've got to be a Martin Luther King kind of, preaching and all of that sort of stuff and being an orator of that level. But you've got to, when I say a visionary, you've got to be clear about the vision. And you've got to make sure that you're the one who is actually always promulgating that vision. The other thing is that, and it's a kind of a hackneyed story, but I always think I agree with people when they say that, organizational structures are always drawn upside down. You've got the CEO at the top and everything goes down from there. And I always think it should be inverted because in actual fact, one of the things that you've got to accept when you become a leader is that you actually become a servant of those people, because you are not at the sharp end of the business in the sense of you're not actually doing the operative work, the operational work, but you're there, you're guiding and you're harnessing and you're making sure the resources are there, but you're in service to the people who are dealing with the customers. And it's actually really, really important that you have that mindset that is your job. It's not about the old-fashioned command and control. And I think that's gone out with the arc.
The dictatorship, no more. No. It doesn't work.
It doesn't work that way. So I think you really got to be in that kind of service mindset. But also, I think part of that service mindset is also realizing that excuse me, when you define the culture of your organization, and every organization is going to end up with a culture, whether you like it or whether you're not. So you better make sure that you do like it. And the only way you're going to like it is to predetermine it and then understand what you've got to do in order to make sure that it's, that it's actually being lived out. So when you're actually talking about the culture, understand what that means. And then you're kind of bringing that through the organization in the everything that you do. Excuse me. But also, I think that one of the things in all businesses nowadays is really important is speed of execution.
Yeah.
And it's actually making sure that as the leader that you haven't created an organization where you've got layers and layers. And I was having a conversation with somebody today, in fact, that I was coaching. I was saying that in their organization, it's really tough to get things done because you've got layers and layers, and that slows down the whole execution process. And you've got to be fast at execution in business. And they've got to see, everybody in the organization has got to see that you're really, really skilled at that. And that you're actually about getting things done. And I think there's an element in there as well of, accepting the principle of imperfect action. Because if we wait until we've every I dotted and T crossed, we never get anything out. We never get out anything out into the marketplace. I'm not saying that you should be slipshod or careless or, anything like that. I'm not saying that at all. But I think that if it's not out in the marketplace, then it's not doing anything. Seth Godin has a great saying. He says, just ship it. Yeah. Just ship it. Get it out there. Get it out in the marketplace. From feedback that you get in the marketplace, you can adjust and do that. But you've got to get it out there and actually let people kind of hold it, touch it, experience it, whatever it might be. But as the leader, you've got to be demonstrating that speed of execution. So I think they are some of the things that you really need to be demonstrating. So I think it's a combination of kind of the culture, the values, the vision, but also speed of execution, and that you do things to remove the blockages in the organization to get things done and to get things done at speed.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. I 100% agree. Execution triumphs the thinking about it, the problem solving, all that. It's like, just go, just get it done, get started. And I think that there's a lot of entrepreneurs these days who are executing, but it's not effective execution, So what's the difference between that? Between you talked about slipshod and just kind of winging it and different stuff like that. How do we know if we're executing effectively and we've thought about it enough, that aspect, or how do we know if we're in over detail, over analyzing, being overly critical and hesitating about the execution? As being masked by I'm just making sure everything is clearly planned out and I'm getting every detail worked out possible before launching to make it as successful as possible.
Yeah, I think when you're doing you take the example of getting something out into the market. I think that there are a couple of things that you've got to highlight for yourselves internally, that these are the things that we won't go unless these things are in place. Right. There are some fundamental things that we need to have. I mean, like if you're putting something out, that it works.
Right.
Pretty fundamental, but that it actually does work, and that you're not putting something flawed out, so that that when you actually put it out into the marketplace, it is what you intended putting out. It's will work for the customer. It will deliver the promise that you're making about the product, and that it's value for money in the eyes of the person who's selling it. I think that if you define your criteria up front of what are the things that you need to have in place, and that if we have all of those things in place, we go right. Now, if some of those we haven't got, like we haven't tested it properly, or we haven't made sure that everything works in it, then I think you do hold it back. But if you've got all of the other stuff, people hold back, say, oh, well, maybe we'll wait and see what the market does. Maybe we'll wait another month. Maybe, we'll wait till January. Maybe we'll wait till whatever, we hear there's another product coming out in the marketplace. And that becomes a form of procrastination, right? So I think it is, if you kind of can define and set your criteria for what needs to be in place, that allows you go to the market in a professional, competent, and with integrity out into the marketplace, then you go with it. And maybe there are some things that you would like to have that you don't have, but you go with it, and then you can kind of backfill it. I think that if you look at a lot of, I think some products are put out into the marketplace that are flawed, and I think that damages a brand. So I think you've got to be very careful about it. Yes, mistakes can happen. Let's face it. It can happen with the best will in the world. But if you know it's flawed going out and you're just, well, we have a deadline, so we do it, then you break trust, and you violate that trust that people have in your brand. And I think that's the part that when it gets hard to really kind of excuse, and it's also very hard to get over. But I think if you are working with your team or your project team, wherever team is actually working on the project, of being really clear about, if we can tick all those boxes, we go, even if there's some other stuff we haven't there. But it puts a pressure on it to get out there and managing to deadlines. But in actual fact, I think that most products, the delay happens because we haven't managed the process well. It's not so much about the criteria, but we've allowed, slippage. And this comes back to the culture of the organization about accountability. Because if you have an organization that there's a very high level of accountability, and if you and I are working with something, I can say to you, Chris, you promised me something on Tuesday morning, and now it's Tuesday afternoon. Where is it? Then, and you're not going to get offended saying, okay, well, wait till I get him back. But that sort of level of account, it's not that I'm having a go, but it's just that's what we promised, right? And I think that the slippage happens more because we allow slippage, and also very often you see the kind of unspoken, unarticulated agreement that I won't challenge you, so you won't challenge me, and that's the kiss of death in an organization. And when that starts to happen, then launch dates get pushed back, initiatives slow down, and you create this, and you get then slippage becomes the norm. We kind of almost expect it.
How do we break free from a culture that might be in that slippage and I won't challenge you if you won't challenge me? How do we break free from that and reverse that?
Well, the way I've seen it done many, many times, because it is doable. I mean, there's no doubt it is doable, and I've seen teams do it numerous times, is actually spending time talking about how we do things around here. And where there is slippage, and where we've kind of, deadlines are not really hard deadlines. They're more indicators than deadlines. Is actually having a conversation and saying, okay, guys, let's actually stand back from this without blaming anybody or any of that. What are the consequences of us doing this? So we've got into a way of behaving, and it's not going to be in just one thing, but it's going to be in everything we do, because we don't, I mean, if we allow slippage, we don't allow slippage just in one part. We tend to allow slippage across a range of things. Let's look at the consequences of this. Let's look at the consequence of being late out into the marketplace, what that's going to have on our revenue this year. Let's look at the consequence of putting that promotion out there. What's it doing to our brand? So really getting people to understand and feel the pain of what that is, and then say, okay, well, how can we actually change this? So, and then get people to say, okay, well, if we start holding each other accountable, but then it's actually getting into the practice of it. Just because we say we're going to hold each other accountable doesn't mean we're going to do it, right? We might all agree with it, but it doesn't mean we're going to do it. So you've got to come back, whether it's at every weekly meeting, monthly meeting, whatever it is, and say, okay, we promised and committed to holding each other accountable. How did we as a team do in the last few months? And actually get people, and I get people to score this, how they do, not themselves, the scoring the team. And what you get is that some people will think that did really well, other people will think that didn't do well. It's not about the number. It's actually about the conversation about, well, okay, so Chris, you scored it at 40% and I scored it at 80%. Well, what did I see that made me score at 80? But what did you see that scored it at 40?
Wow. Yeah.
And therefore, well, maybe I didn't see what you saw. So then we say, okay, well, if whatever the average is, what do we want it to be next month or next week, whenever we're doing it again? But that you're coming back and reviewing how we're doing. So you're just continually raising the bar. It's not one of these one and done things. You've actually got to come back and track it and measure it and have discussions about it. And that way you just kind of move the needle. So you're moving the performance up. Because also don't forget that not everybody in the team will get it at the same time. And that's not because of intellect. It resonates with people at different times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for a team to get it, it's got to be over a period of time. But if you keep on coming back to it and reviewing it and understanding what it means and talking about examples of, well, we said we were going to do it, but on that particular issue, we didn't. And look at the impact of that, right?
Yeah.
And also, when you're looking at a senior team, Chris, if the senior team allows drift, then everybody allows drift.
Yeah, it trickles down.
It trickles down, and then you start multiplying the impact of that across an organization. And suddenly, the impact is huge, absolutely huge. So it's something that you really got to challenge your organization about.
Wow, so powerful, John. I love this. And for people who want to create this new standard, what would you recommend looking at when scoring ourselves on that accountability? Is there different aspects or different things that we can look at highlighting? How we would give ourselves a 40 versus an 80? Anything general guidelines?
Well, I think that, if you're doing it on a consistent basis and you're doing it, on a very consistent could be once a year, which isn't very good. I meant more a frequent basis rather than consistent basis. But if you're doing it on a frequent basis, you've got plenty of examples in a short period of time where we can talk about, okay, you said you're going to have it on Monday, or we had a milestone for a project on that particular date on a Friday. So you have plenty of examples to see, well, actually, how are we doing it? So you've got real live examples. So if you're doing it with the benefit of recency, then it helps to actually make it real, right? So therefore, it can be a very real conversation. If you're trying to have it about kind of over a long period in history, it becomes a little bit more vague. So if we're actually talking about, in a month in an organization, there are lots of deadlines, there are lots of commitments that have got to be made in that, and targets are a commitment, right?
Yep.
So, there are lots of things that you can track and you can measure. And it's just having the conversation. It's not having the conversation to apportion blame, but it's actually understanding, well, why is it that we said we were going to do something and then we didn't do it? Right now, and you hear people say, "Oh, I was very busy." Well, you're going to be busy. You're not going to be walking around with your hands in your pockets. You're going to be busy. So, you've got to allow for that. Being busy isn't an excuse. Now, sometimes it'll be, well, something else took priority, and that's perfectly legitimate, right? So we make a conscious decision that we're not going to do it by a certain date. But if you do it with, great frequency, in a short period of time, it's just having a conversation about the operational promises and commitments that you made, and you either did it or you didn't do it.
That's right. So powerful. That's great. And I love within a period of a month, there's so many tasks and deadlines that we can execute on. And that's a real standard. It's a real measure. And if we spread it out to 90 days or 6 months, it's like, okay, well, how much can you really measure and remember about 5 months ago, the types of commitments that we made or missed? And I think at that point, it's been integrated or swept under the rug, right? Like, it's like, oh, like I don't even know. I don't even want to go back and think that far because it's too far back, and we tend to generalize that instead of having the specific pinpoints, and that's the specific pinpoints and the actions and the moments is what we can look back on, reflect on, and then correct moving forward.
And I think it's the same thing about, when you're looking at performance of an individual, and it's the same principle that applies there. If we're only sitting down once a year to review my performance, and I'm sitting down with you as my boss once a year, how are we going to have a conversation about something that happened 10 months ago? What's the point? I mean, certainly my memory is going to be a little foggy. Right. Your memory is going to be probably the same, or it's certainly going to be different, right? and it also, it's so far in the past. So it's the same thing about if you're managing a team. When you see something that is not right, you've got to address it with immediacy, right? Don't let time go by. Find the opportunity to have the conversation about it, because then you can actually, it's in that moment, it's in that time, and it is the most relevant time to actually catch it. Whether it's an error or whether it's something that's been allowed drift or slip, whatever it might be. But if it's something that in terms that you're talking about the performance of an individual, catch them doing good, right? And comment on it. But also if you see where there's deficiency, take the time to actually address that immediately as well. And don't let time go by, because if you let time go by, people say, oh, well, yeah, but that was the week where, you know, the market collapsed, and therefore it gets all mushed up in kind of vagueness and excuses. And then it's hard to go back and unpack it. Whereas if it only happened yesterday, then it's much harder to be foggy about it.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. This is amazing. Great conversation, John. I'm having a lot of fun. And I know for our audience, they probably want to know the art of transition. When going from one place, one position, we have a lot of entrepreneurs who are starting a new journey, a new career. What would you recommend to have a transition-based mindset, something that's adaptable and flexible and that clearly identifies what needs to be done, what needs to be changed, what needs to be shifted to succeed in a new role? What can you give us about that? What experience have you had with that?
You're talking about you move to a new role in a new organization, that when people transition to it, you're talking about,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And that's a huge area. And I think that, you know, there's an old saying that what got you here won't get you there, right? And I think that, you know, it's an old saying. I don't know who said it, but it is an old saying. But it's also very true. And I think what we tend to do is that we tend to believe that, you know, the skills and the talent and the work and the endeavor that I put in to get me to this place, and I'm now in this new role, they're the same things that I've got to apply in that new role.
Yeah.
And that's not the case. Right? Particularly if you're actually moving to a kind of a more senior level, right? Yeah. I'm not saying that you're going to get rid of them, but I'm saying realize that you've got to transition. You know, a new role, a more senior role in a new organization, or even in your existing organization, it's a different role, it's a different job. So you've got to understand, you've got to get your mindset around that. So you actually got your mindset around, this is different, and I have to be different in this role. Right? I have got to be doing different things than I was doing previously. I've got to understand about what are the really important things in this role, because they would be different to previous. How am I going to spend my time is likely to be different, particularly if you're being promoted to another role. How I spend my time is different to what I did previously. And the skills that I will need to do this new role are also different to the skills that I've used heretofore. And it's really recognizing those and understanding it. I think the other part of it is, so you've got the mindset and understanding what's got to be different about you. I think the other part of it is that you've got to be really take your time to actually understand the culture, the norms, and the way of doing things in a new organization, right? Because if you're coming into a new organization, you know it from afar to an extent. But when you get into it, it's different. Every organization has its own way of doing things, its own, kind of culture, its own idiosyncrasies, its own everything, right? And that's just the nature of it. So you've got to get time to understand it. You've got to look at all of the data that's there. So you actually kind of really dig down into the data and understand the performance of the organization. And you've also got to map out the stakeholders for you in the new organization. And this, because very often people just rely upon the person that they're reporting to, and they manage that relationship. But there are other relationships, right? There are peer relationships. There are other people that are at a level more senior to you, likely to be as well. And there are different, it could be people outside the organization, people inside the organization, but identifying what those stakeholders are. So to go into it in a very reflective mode. So it's about the mindset about you, so it's the change in you. It's about the immersion in the data, really get into the data so you understand really all the hard data and not surface. I was talking to somebody quite recently, and I referred to it in another conversation I had the other day, but they had taken over a team in a new organization. And one of the questions that I asked was, have you gone through all the personnel files of the people that are reporting to you? They said, no, I've met them. My point of, yes, meet them. Of course you're going to meet them. But why would you not look at their files to understand what, because that's the data, right? Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that you get colored and influenced totally by the data, but it's part of all of the assimilation of all of the information that you put in so that you're making good decisions. Because one of the anxieties that we all have going into a new role, and we've all had it, right, is you want to make an impression.
Yeah.
Because you're the new kid on the block and the people are looking at you going, okay, I wonder, was he the right guy that got appointed into the new role? And you're desperate to make a good impression. And the risk is that you make a decision that is the wrong decision through lack of knowledge and through lack of digging deep into the organization, either into the data or into the culture or into the way of doing things. And you make a mistake in that early period and you've damaged your brand. And it's very, very hard to actually come back from that. So it's a really important time, and a lot of preparation and a lot of work has to go into that. And I do a lot of that work with clients. And, you know, it's pretty much underestimated how much work it takes to actually get anybody in. And if you do the proper onboarding into a new role, you can get somebody to be really highly effective in half the time, which is really, let's face it, what the organization wants.
Totally.
But you're also making sure you're putting a process around that individual that is really giving the platform to succeed. The alternative, which happens many times, is that apart from kind of being met on the first day and shown where the canteen are, or maybe where the toilets are, and where the car park is, and the keys of the car, or whatever else you might be given, it's kind of good luck and God bless, and off you go, and you know, good luck with everything. And I'm exaggerating to make the point, but actually, it's not too far from the truth in many occasions. And that's a dreadful thing too, because also the manager of the person who's bringing you in has got a responsibility. And sorry, the other thing that I omitted to say was it's really important to get clarity and alignment between you and your manager about what does success look like in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and 12 months.
Yeah.
And be really clear. I'm not just kind of talking about have a rough conversation, but I'm talking about nail it. Absolutely nail it. And if you don't do that, there is the real possibility, and I have seen it, where the manager has one view of what success looks like, and the person who's coming into the role has a somewhat different interpretation. And that's not a good place to be.
Wow. Dang. This is powerful, John. I love this conversation. And I think that's a great onboarding process for even people who we're bringing onto our teams. You know, it's like it's important for us as leaders embodying that leadership to help facilitate that for someone else who may not have the wherewithal to ask that question of here's what success looks like in 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months, 12 months. And so we give them a track to run on. We plant the seeds early on so that they can step into that, and vice versa. You know, we can create that expectation for ourselves and our knowledge so that we're not at the end of 6 months or a year saying, well, I thought I was doing everything I was supposed to do.
Yeah, and that's not a conversation. And I think that, you know, if you're hiring somebody in, you owe it to that person to do that.
Yes.
To make it clear. You really do owe it to them to make that clear, because otherwise it's not fair. And I'm a great believer in fairness. And I think that you owe it to them to actually map it out and to give them, you know, the proper launching pad to be successful, because this, you know, a mistake at that stage in a career can be quite damaging.
Yeah. 100%, John. So we're beginning to wrap it up now. What were the main things that we wanted to get across to our audience from this interview? What were the main points that we touched on? Just to recap, things that stuck out in your mind as the most important things you want to drive home for our audience right now.
I think, you know, I'm fascinated by leadership, and I think that, you know, the world is kind of begging and craving for real leadership. And I think that we can all provide that in our own organizations and in our worlds. And I think it is understanding it from our own individual perspective, but also understanding that, you know, what contribution am I making to the people who are following me? You know, am I living up to the vision? Am I living up to the mission? Am I living up to the values? Am I bringing them along? Am I developing them? Are they benefiting? Are they growing because I'm their leader? And I think that's just a huge challenge that we need to put to ourselves, you know, time and time again. And I think that is something that I really would like people to reflect on. I think the other thing I would talk about, and you know, and as part of something that I give away to your audience, is that I'm a great believer in in data. I've mentioned it a few times, kind of really understand, get your data, but then, then make sure that you're kind of what I always talk about, when you're looking at data, you look at data in order to progress. So when you're looking at it, it's about accessing the data, then aligning on the actions that you're going to take, then act, and then assess the results and keep on going back and kind of rinse and repeat that the whole time. And I've got a short video that I'll give everyone here that they can access that just kind of talks about that, because I think it's a very simple. I call it the four A's to bridge the gap. Yeah. And it's actually such a simple thing that we can do that really is very helpful. And I think the last point I'd like people to reflect on is that when they're bringing on a new manager or appointing a new manager into a role, are they actually giving them a platform? Are they really giving the platform for success, or are they allowing sink or swim? Wow. And I think that as the integrity of the spirit of taking people on, because you are playing with careers and playing with lives. You owe it to the people to actually give them the launch pad. And I would advocate to everybody, make sure you do what you can to make sure it's in place.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, that's a great mindset as a leader, especially to take on, like, I owe it to these people. I'm going to go the extra mile to make sure that they're equipped to succeed, because this is their life that's at stake. This is their reputation. This is, their livelihood. So I 100% agree, John. So our audience is loving this interview. I know I'm loving it. They want to know, how can they stay connected? How can they take the next step on their journey with you, John?
Well, what I've done is I mentioned that there are a couple of things that I'd love to give any of your listeners, and they can access it if they go to my website, www.johnmurphyinternational.com/greatest possible self. Okay. They can actually access there. I have a book that they can download, a short book they can read in half an hour, which is the 10 key traits of top business leaders. You mentioned at the very beginning. Yep. That was an Amazon bestseller, so they can download that and have it for free. Sweet. There also is that that short video, the 4 A's to bridge the gap, which they can access there as well, and they can take that. And also there's they can link up with me, put their name and email address to connect with me, and I'd be delighted to have a chat with any of your listeners, and because it's been a real pleasure for me to be here.
Thank you, John. We appreciate you. Thank you for those gifts as well. Everyone, you heard it. Go to johnmurphyinternational.com/greatest possible self. Is it greatest possible self or GPS? Do you know?
Greatest possible self.
Greatest possible self. Okay, perfect. So go to greatest possible self/greatest possible self, and definitely stay connected with John at johnmurphyinternational.com. Send him an email. Let him know that you heard the interview. You're excited about continuing to grow your leadership. And John, thank you so much for being here. You're a powerhouse. You're a champion and a leader who is empowering other leaders. So thank you for doing that, man.
Well, Chris, I love what you're doing with the show. I think it's marvelous. I congratulate you, and it's been an absolute honor to be with you.
Thank you so much. We'll see you soon, okay?
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.